Okay, thank you everyone. Sorry about that. Hello and welcome to the National Road Safety Partnership Program, how to effectively maintain your vehicle during periods of non-use. My name is Jerome Carslake, there I am. I'm Program Director of the NRSPP and its many activities. To find out more, please visit the NRSPP website, register for our newsletter, and follow us on social media and be nice and active as well. Today's session will go for around 60 minutes, and we might just run over a little bit because we started a little bit late. We're going to take discussion throughout. Cameron's really keen to make it as engaging as possible. We're also going to record it, and it'll be shared on the NRSPP website along with the PDF afterwards as well. So, as I mentioned, we love your input. Hate that picture. We want to make it as interactive as possible. So shoot through your questions in the question box. There's a chat box as well. Feel free to shoot through some thoughts as we go along. But if we can really capture those questions in the Q&A, it's much easier as we can go through. So key thing now is we have an amazing presenter with us today, lots of skills. Cameron is Director of the Research and Development and Head of Training at the Australian Driving Institute. He's been there since 1991, so you'd have a bit of long service under your belt, I would dare say. 24 years of customised defence driving, utilising preventive techniques and really discipline in behavioural safety training as well. So experience in oil and gas, agriculture, retail, so worked all over the place. And it's actually, when we do the practice runs, it's really an enjoyable chance to have a chat with him as well around how things beyond road safety as well. So welcome, Cameron.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone. Thank you for your presumed patience. I should point out that despite all those years of being involved in training, I did start off as a trainer, my previous life as a mechanic, and have been able to weave the two together. I would describe my mechanical background as particularly white collar, not your typical upbringing. So this leads to some other influences. So I'll roll through the PowerPoint, there may not be terribly many questions here, but there may be some insightful questions, but we'll roll through it. So coronavirus. So the cars obviously go into some form of lockdown, and there's, depending on the fleet, in our experience, there would be a number of fleets that simply got parked up, and other fleets got minimal use. And then, of course, within that, you had a car dedicated to a custodian or a fleet vehicle. And the poor old fleet vehicle was or the pool vehicle was the one that saw the least amount of love. And after a few weeks of being left there, they were covered in dust and filth and weren't ready to be used. And so the deterioration can occur by simple grime, and I'll mention that more a little bit later on. Like a plane is happiest in the air, a car needs to be driven. And there's a variety of reasons behind that. So we'll expand it as we go on, but drivers are essentially responsible for the clean, safe and roadworthy condition. And I'll expand on that as well directly. Normal procedure should be to report suspect or unsafe vehicle conditions, or anything you think might be odd. Then your team need to be encouraged to report that, and obviously demonstrating safe practices. And if you're a pool driver or custodian, the rules still remain the same by the time you hit the road. So even if you're not ultimately responsible for the day-to-day care of that car, as the current driver, you're taking on that responsibility. And then one of the aims is to retain the as best value as possible for the car. One of the things that I quite enjoy doing with fleets is understanding how they choose to go about their purchasing arrangements, whether they buy the fleet, whether they lease it, what residual they have. But it's always about how do we lose the least amount of money on a fleet. Some fleets manage to turn that into a money-making exercise, but that takes a bit of time and planning. But the name of the game is lose the least amount of money. And day-to-day care is one of the key things there, excuse me. So how has your company's vehicle, how has the usage changed in this time? So have you been one of the companies exposed to a pure lockdown, or have you gone crazy? Some of the transport companies that we've been talking to have gone with 6 months worth of business, which is a 60% increase on normal. So their vehicles, whether they be cars, light trucks and trucks, are actually being run into the ground at the moment. So diametrically opposed to, let's say, one organisation that I was working with was the Safe Work, the government Safe Work Authority. All their vehicles got parked up. All of them looked like they had dust poured all over them. So two completely different ends of the spectrum. And we had to go in there and give them a bit of a health check because they weren't being used. So why do we maintain it? Well, we rely on them. They need to get us to our destinations. It's to help us get our job done by a variety of means. And by using them and keeping them clean, you do prevent unnecessary repairs. Obviously, driving has a major component there, by the way, of how they're driven. I would argue that too many drivers don't drive with enough mechanical empathy, and there's some rather graphic stories there. So dirty oil can damage the engine, but it needs to be really filthy, dirty stuff to do that. It's more of a lack of efficiency. So dirty old oil will just simply make you inefficient. The performance can be reduced, and you're going to need to be you need to be sharp to feel that. You probably wouldn't feel it yourself, but the hip pocket or the Visa card will feel it. And then obviously rotating tyres to improve their tyre life. We rotate our tyres every service. We've got different vehicles. Hiluxes, for example, required to be serviced every 10,000 Ks, which is I think a very big disappointment to have to service a car so regularly. But the benefit is that the tyres are rotated quite frequently. So we get really good mileage out of our tyres as a result. And then obviously from a compliance perspective, so are your lights working, and how do you check that when you're on your own? You know, how do you check your lights? And that can be quite simply done by reversing up to a wall or using the reflection of another vehicle. And of course, registration. So most states now don't have a registration sticker. So how are you checking that? And most states actually have an app. It's very easy to simply punch in the registration number, and you know what the registration is. You can do it on any car. Doesn't have to be your own car.
Actually, that's a really interesting point, because I think I reflect back on grey fleet vehicles. It's one of the headaches if you're managing. And those who know grey fleet, they're the vehicles that workers would use which aren't owned by the company. And one of the headaches are, is it insured? Is it registered? Is it roadworthy? And I think quite a few questions around how can I check to even make sure it's registered. I think that'd be quite an easy way some people would not be aware of.
That actually also goes into novated vehicles as well. So novated's very popular with companies who are trying to absolve themselves of some type of risk or like a financial problems with fleets, and there's that aspect of taking a novated vehicle. So you're given an allowance. You have your vehicle, and that is your problem. That is your responsibility 100%. And if you leave the company, the car goes with you, and the debt continues with you. And the idea of the company is to try and absolve themselves of some risk there, but you can't, because it's still workplace. And that can change. But no, at the end of the day, if under grey fleet or novated or anything, the driver hops in. I'll show you something directly, but you are responsible for the checks, but do you have a designated person? And one of the classics that we find, if we're going to be doing, like the poles and wires organisations around the country have got very strict protocols about having a daily vehicle check, which for a number of reasons I disagree with that. The main reason being is the check simply doesn't happen, and we'll roll in to do a program, and the individual that we're training is there ticking through frantically to tick off all the checklists without checking the vehicle, and we find that probably the most common thing. And having a designated person to manage a fleet is a huge responsibility and job. But of the car, it always has to be the driver. Are you going through a leasing company? Are you managing the fleet yourself? Are you doing the finance yourself? Or do you have an organisation who you have one of those wonderful arrangements where the leasing looks after the servicing as well? Our fleet manager. there's some extremely good fleet managers in Australia, and it would be good to see fleet managers talk more together, because there's some real advantages to be had by listening to some smart fleet managers. Or management. So management's not responsible for it. Management is responsible for providing the tools to get the job done. The service technician isn't responsible either. They're simply responsible for servicing and carrying that out properly. They're not allowed to leave a car, beg your pardon, they're not allowed to let a car leave a workshop without it being completely roadworthy. Is it the driver? So back in 1968, Australia ratified an agreement internationally with part of the Geneva Convention, and it literally kicks off as the first sentence is the driver is solely responsible. So you can go through that list of people again, of all the way back up to the designated person, and it's not them, it's not the leasing company, it's not the fleet manager, it's not management, it's not the service technician, it is obviously the driver. So that's a part of what we agreed to. So answer is yes, driver. On the road and being driven, all those responsibilities, but the employer has a responsibility to ensure they provide a safe work environment. And that's a different argument. So identifying things that need to be fixed are, you don't need to be a mechanic. You can do some very basic fundamental checks yourself, but this is also about vehicles that are spending time sitting around, which I'll look forward to talking about directly, where so the sticker on the windscreen is a very, very simple way to ascertain if it's due for a service. And I'm trying to understand, I reckon that's one of our cars there, and at 100,000 Ks, my gosh, it's one of the new ones. So I should point out, by the way, that one of our training vehicles has knocked up 250,000 Ks, I think it is. Another one nearly 300,000. And to look at them, you'd swear they hadn't even done 100,000. We had the cars valued compared to depreciation, and they're valued at 27,000, but they're worth under 15 according to depreciation. But they're immaculate. Vehicle maintenance logbook, which should be with your owner's manual, which is now these days more called an operator's manual, and then a basic vehicle checklist. So we use a fairly involved one that I don't recommend you use, because we're going overboard with ours when we're conducting training. Having a much more simple one, which I'll show you shortly, it's called a powers check. With tyres, being the only thing in touch with the planet, they are often walked straight past and looked at the outside edge. You need to look at the inside edge and the outside edge and make a comparison between the two. If they're even, you're happy. If they're not even, you're not happy. And it's not a myth that the rear tyres can wear out as well. A lot of people focus on the front tyres, but the rear tyres, especially in a modern front-wheel drive car, the rear wheels can be aligned, and if they're out, they'll wear your tyres out as well. Rotations, these are obvious, and wheel alignment, both should happen roughly every 10,000 Ks. They go through all sorts of hell, so they do need that check. And of course, where you check the tyre is where you check your pressures on the placard. If you're not aware of that, the placard is on the B pillar 9 times out of 10, or in the operator's manual. That you would expect pressure to deplete over about a month, about 2 psi a month, and that would be reasonable. Low pressure leads into poor handling and poor fuel economy, and that happens very quickly. So if you're 4 psi down from what you would need, you will see a difference in handling, braking, and fuel economy.
And Cameron, on that, do you think with that PSI, because a lot of cars have the sensor technology in the tyres and all that sort of stuff at the moment, do you just go, look, I'm driving, I've got that, I've got peace of mind, or should I still pull into a service station and physically check it every month as well?
No, I let the car do it. It's an extremely complex system. Every single vehicle now brought into Australia has stability control, ABS, obviously, traction control, active yaw control is another word for it. And the ABS sensor, which is on the back of the brakes, is measuring wheel rotation, and it can even measure the a 2 psi difference in rolling diameter. So that's an extremely fine test. Some vehicles, you can check your independent pressure through the dashboard. I reckon Hyundai do that with their i30. I had a Hyundai i30 as a hire car, just an entry-level hire car, magnificent little car. And you could check your tyre pressures independently. So, and I've found them to be entirely accurate. They've got no reason to be out. So no, I rely on them. Tech's a good thing. Tech takes all the hard work away. Another vehicle we've got, you do the entire check from the dashboard. You don't even have to lift the bonnet to check the oil. It can tell you not only oil quality, but oil quantity. So at the end of the day, I strongly encourage fleet managers to look at that type of tech in vehicles, and if they have it, buy it, because it's one less problem with human interaction to bugger it up, quite frankly. So and having low oil or poor oil being tested by the vehicle itself is an extraordinary bit of tech, but it's happening. And a lot of modern cars are coming out without dipsticks for their oil. So, and that's a bit of an aircraft mentality, but a lot of European cars now don't have dipsticks, and of course electric cars don't have them at all. Sidewall damage, very, very common thing. That's that highlighted damage you can see there is right on the edge of a problem. The sidewall takes a great amount of effort because you can't easily check the inside of a sidewall on the inside of the car, but the outside one is normally the one that gets rubbed up against the curb, and a chunk like this is worth reporting and changing. Nails and screws are a bit of an interesting one in tyres. Some of the time I'll choose to leave it in. If there's no air leaking, the temptation is to leave it in, because that's how the tubeless tyre works. If you take that screw out and the air starts coming out, put it straight back in again, and you would take it to a tyre retailer to get it fixed. The value of getting it fixed means that you won't get a tyre separation between the carcass and the tread, which is often caused by air getting between the two. But believe it or not, most people who pick up a nail never know they've even got one. The tubeless tyres are quite a remarkable thing. But this ballooning is a problem. So that's generally caused by clipping a curb or pothole, and it actually causes the sidewall to separate from the carcass of the tyre. So you now have an air gap in there, and that's quite a problem. So you would give that the flick. But one of the things that to me I found a little bit humorous, because it was a nice innocent thing of the phone going berserk over people driving their cars after it's been sitting still for a month, and the thing's going flop, 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 flop down the road, and it's because there's flat spots that have occurred on the tyres. And all that's happened there is that the tyre's been sitting flat for so long that the bands and so forth have just gone flat, and it needs to get to operating temperature to get it all back and malleable again, and so that flat spotting will go away. Don't worry about flat spotting. You'd expect flat spotting to happen after a month of sitting around, particularly cold weather, which is what we've had. We've had sitting around doing nothing in cold weather. So you would expect them to go whack, whack, whack as they're rolling and get operating temperature.
Yeah, it sounds a bit like us in Melbourne at the moment, as we've sort of been sitting around, now finally getting out of lockdown. Yeah, I can feel similarities with that description of the tyre, I must admit.
Oh, I bet you have. That's of course, we've been footloose and fancy free for 3 months now, so we don't have that problem. The life of fuel is actually a bit of an interesting one, and overcomplicated, where fuel will naturally degrade. It has to, because it's a vapor that we're using at the end of the day. We don't use the liquid per se to ignite the combustion process. It becomes a vapor. And the good thing about having fuel inside a container is that it can't escape anywhere theoretically, but it still degrades. So the octane values will degrade. Oxygen is a bit of an enemy of kept fuel, but it's a friend of firing fuel. So the way you fix that, of course, is and maintain a higher level of octane and its volatility is by simply leaving it totally sealed and ideally in a full fuel tank. So in a cooler time, so at 20 degrees, you'd expect it to last up to 6 months in a fuel tank and not have any real bad degrading power bang for buck. At 30 degrees, that'll halve it. So if your cars are sitting around for 6 months, one in the winter for 6 months, one in the summer for 6 months, you'll only get 6 months life out of you'll get 6 months life out of the winter car, and for fuel, you'll only get 3 months out of the summer car for fuel. And diesel being way less volatile is 6 to 12 months easily. You don't get anywhere near the vapor effect that comes off diesel.
Does the on the petrol, does it matter? It's like 92, 95, 98. Does it matter at all? It's same principle for all of it?
Yeah, it'll all degrade. The only difference is that if you've got 98, it'll degrade to 95 or 92. 92 will degrade beyond 92. So, but a car will still run off 85.
Yeah, just a bit smoky.
It'll just be a bit wheezy. Yeah. I think India has an octane rating of 85. So explains a lot of things. So to prevent the fuel from going off, make sure it's driven. And this mixes up the solution and keep it full. And that way you retain more of your energy. And because that's what a fuel tank is, and fuel is you're retaining energy. So the fuel tank is no different to batteries in an electric car in this respect, which is why having them full and having them used and mixed up will let it last longer. And then from a starting point of view, a weekly run makes perfect sense. There's a couple of vehicles that we've got here that haven't been used, but every week we've got to go out and give them a run, and we'll go and let it idle and warm up and take it for a lap around the block and then park it again. And so we're not being silly with it, but everything's working well. So it starts, at least we know it starts and it runs well, and we so it gets a brief inspection as opposed to a monthly inspection. That's how we separate them. So a brief inspection is literally a walk around. A monthly inspection is lift the bonnet and check tyre pressures, do it properly. So the trick is that if it's left outside, which a lot of these vehicles have been, a lot of the fleet vehicles that have been held to ransom during lockdown, the occasional chap will run in and he'll have 50 cars to do over a few days and drive to the car wash, and being exposed to all the dust and filth, they were filthy. Drive to the car wash, get it cleaned up, maintain its integrity, slosh the fuel around, get the warm tyres, and of course the battery gets a charge, because the battery in an internal combustion engine car is keeping all sorts of things alive still, so it will deplete over time. So you give that another buzz. All the fluids get to have a bit of a warm up and a cycle. Now, a cycle is a term that's used often around heat. So you're cycling heat through to keep things moving and fresh. And one that a lot of people don't think of is that it keeps the seals rubbery. And if it sits around for too long, the seals will dry out and they no longer prevent oil from going out or moisture from coming in. And so keeping things working means that some simple axle seals, for example, or seals around crankshafts and so forth, maintain their rubbery nature. And I think I've said this enough now about fuel being mixed around. And of course, driving it means that you clean that surface rust off. It is interesting, depending on where the car comes from and OE discs fitted to the car, that depending on the iron content in the disc, they'll either start rusting immediately, like after you've washed the car, and go back a day later, you'll see surface rust, and others have got lower levels and The rust will take longer, but they're brakes. They are your dearest, dearest friend in the car, and so you need to keep them clean as well. So just going for a simple drive to the car wash and back keeps all of that healthy and alive. And depending if you've got to fill in a logbook, this poor bloke had to fill in a whole heap of logbooks as he was going to and from his the fleet yard and the car wash, just to do a 5K logbook. But anyway, it had to happen. And with EVs are really no different. I hope you're all looking into EVs. I've done some testing on them, and they are fabulous, fabulous cars. I should point out that I am also a motoring enthusiast, and I have a bit of passion for this, and but I also love tech. I really think that you're going to see in the next year or so a huge shift towards EV. I don't think we're going to get government support for it, by the way. I think we're going to have to do that ourselves. But I tell you, it was such an easy car to drive. Interestingly enough, you let it lying around, it does exactly the same thing as any other vehicle, and you're going to deplete about 1 to 2% out of the battery for every day it's not used. So even driving your EV regularly has that ideal notion of keeping it moving and getting it charged up again. If you do need to charge it up completely, the best practice is that you want to keep it between 20 and 80%. You don't want to go beyond 80%. Most EVs will let you set a limit to that, or it'll be a built-in limit of not going past 80% charge. And every now and then, if you need full charge, you zip it all the way to 100%, and so you can get your full range. But charging with like your slow 240 volt power means that it will send energy into there slowly and gently, and that's best for the battery as well, so you don't need to rush. If you have the ability to keep your vehicle in a cool undercover and protected from heat, the car will obviously last better. It's no different to why you and I would have a garage in preference to leaving it out on the street. It's exactly the same scenario. And batteries, of course, deteriorate very, very quickly in hot temperatures as well as we enter that. Generally, general deterioration, which is more aesthetic, can be to do with paint. So that's an extreme example you can see there, but that's just sun, wind, rain, nothing else. Just nature taking its course on red paint. Red paint is the paint, by the way, that deteriorates fastest. And I don't know why. I'd like to know that. But apparently that's why Virgin changed all their planes from being red to white, because the rate at which they had to keep the red up. Red was the fastest deteriorating colour. But so don't choose red. But if you get a white car, like your typical fleet vehicle, which is white, the beautiful thing about white is that it does, strangely enough, hide the dirt better, so it's easier to make it appear clean. But this type of damage you see on the bonnet of this particular car can happen in a very, very short period of time, and it's often because it hasn't been cleaned, and it is that simple. Even though it's out in the sun, it needs to be cleaned. With the oil and gas work that we do, they tend not to clean their vehicles in some places because it's only going to get dirty again, and our argument is that if you keep it clean, it's going to last longer and won't present anywhere near the troubles. You know, hose the car out, air gun through the car to keep the dust out. But mind you, they keep putting their air conditioning on recirculate, thinking that keeps the dust out, and that's a myth. Rust will occur because a grime will sit there and collect the moisture, and it will eventually start to turn to rust. Of a brand new car, you'll start to get spots of rust, particularly around where the boot and bonnet close, and you get leaves and leaf matter and road grime and stuff that gets caught in the gunnel around the boot. When you lift a boot, you can see around the gunnel there, rust can occur in there, and that's not only unsightly, it affects your value. And interior odours with cars that are locked up, depending on the vehicle type you choose, you might get a like really cheap vinyl, and that will show up as vapor that comes up onto the windscreen. You get that milky effect on your windscreen. The cheaper the vinyl, the more vinyl smear you get, and it stinks. And if you leave a car there for a couple of weeks with the windows all wound up, it's awful. So part of our care when cars are left lying around is to crack the windows a bit. Hard to do when they're outside. Obviously carpet seats and stains and so forth, but these are things that, because people insist on eating in cars, which is something I don't like one bit. It's my own level of OCD there, OCD of eating in cars. I don't like it. And obviously sap. Sap's a classic. Bird droppings will probably be one of the bigger ones, and depending where you are in Australia, you've got bat droppings as well to deal with, which are highly caustic and will just chew straight through the paint. So you've got to wash that off immediately. Then from a general cleaning perspective, I'm going to endue you with a video shortly where, now, the clean needs to happen roughly once a week. That once a week is the ideal time. It's when you would fuel up and get these basic checks done and cleaning done. We clean our cars regularly, but once a week they get a big tub. Ideal to be kept under cover. Keep the interior free of loose items, so it's in a professional condition at all times. Obviously, my influence there of especially food, because that causes a car to smell very quickly. And when you get into a car and the individual has been maybe sneaking a cigarette in, but the worst, I think, the worst of all is iced coffee or milk containers that seem to work their way under seats, and that just absolutely gets into everything.
And question, just a comment here from Mark. I think this is an interesting one. He sort of mentioned he's experienced mold build-up in lockdown vehicles as well. And is that more prevalent probably in Northern Australia, do you think, or is it, or it doesn't matter where you are, or is it just what's been left in the vehicles might add to that sort of situation?
I say north of Wollongong that happens. So as you get into that sort of subtropical, there's two things that people do wrong. They don't have fresh air. They insist on putting their air conditioning on recirculate. You should only ever put your air conditioning on recirculate briefly for things like cooling it down or warming it up quickly, and then go straight back to fresh air again. If you drive on dirt, fresh air, fan up, pressurize the cabin, keep it all out. But having airflow through it will prevent things like the buildup of mold. So I'd suggest that the cars are being left with windows up and recirculated air. Mark might be able to shed more light on that, but I would generally say that's it, if he feeds back to us.
And it's interesting because you mentioned, I guess, not recirculating air. What about it going through tunnels, just out of interest? Like, is it better to leave it with air coming in, or do you...
No, fair point. That the carbon filter or cabin filter, the same thing, can also be a pollen filter. They are not able to keep out aroma. And there was a really nasty hay fever event that occurred a few years ago where a number of people in South Australia and Victoria actually died from this hay fever event. And it was due to an electrical storm that split the pollen in half. And that was enough to get through all of these filters, because it's an extremely rare event to have that happen. And so hay fever just went crazy everywhere. People who don't even get hay fever got it. And but you can't keep out something as small as that. You can't keep out aroma. You can't keep out smoke. And the only way you can do that is by putting on to recirculate, and you block out all of those pollutants. So driving through a tunnel, absolutely. Gosh, pick a tunnel. Harbour Tunnel, that stinks. There's one in Brisbane I just did recently. That was awful, full. And I drive predominantly on fresh air, so I notice it as soon as you get a cabin filled with diesel. It's bang, straight over it, close it out. So no, you're quite correct there, Jerome.
Right.
Keeping dust off things is just simply part of general cleanliness, and it's also part of retaining value. And repair damage is just simply good management. Now, overall presentation, I'm happy to admit that I'm pretty hard on people when it comes to the presentation of their vehicles, particularly if they're in a sales role. That the vehicle is well presented, and it's always in the position of readiness to put a client in the car and take them somewhere instead of having to kick their way past milk containers and McDonald's wrappers and so forth. That the car is always in the position of readiness to put a client in the car. And having a car sit around for a long time and all it needs is to be run through the car wash is the perfect way to keep it prepared. So you're showing care and professionalism, obviously. I mean, I don't really have to tell any professional this one. The one that I like to lean on the most is resale potential. I like to see fleets actually get a return on their fleet, which I'm happy to expand on another time, but how you structure your finance and your residuals and whether you own it at the end and sell it and keeping it clean means that it's wonderful value to you. Which may mean also that you've got to pay 30% tax on the money you make out of a car, which would be just the best problem you could ask for, I think. So the powers check, this is not a new one. I think most people around the world use this powers check. It's an acronym. Very, very simply, what used to be entirely petrol is now diesel. So for a bit of a laugh, we say P is for fuel, but spell it with a PH. And obviously checking how much fuel you got before you travel. This is all obvious stuff. The correct fuel, you'd be blown away how many people put petrol in diesel and diesel in petrol. It's an extraordinary number of people who do it. You notice, by the way, that underneath that diesel cap, the fuel filler is particularly clean. That's not for the sake of a photograph. That's how it is all the time, that there's no fuel residual ever left in there. And in particular diesels, because diesels are quite fussy with dirt, so we're always wiping that out. It's got shocking OCD in this place. Out of a point of interest, what side is the fuel filler cap on, and that is often determined by, you can see that little fuel system, that arrow there. You generally find that Japanese cars will have the actual dial itself on the wrong side, but there'll be an arrow, as it is there, saying the fuel filler is on that side. European cars tend to put the fuel gauge on the side of the filler cap. I have no idea why. If you do accidentally fill your vehicle with the wrong fuel, and this has been happening lately because people have been rushing and they're going from same vehicle shape but different power units, so petrol to diesel. Don't panic if you notice that you've done that. Don't panic at all. It can be fixed quite easily. Ideally, don't start the engine unless you want to smoke the place out, and call for assistance. And there's a number of things you can do here. The first thing I'd do is actually go in and speak to the petrol station people. But there is a crowd called Wrong Fuel Rescue. They should be on the stock market. They're making a fortune at the moment. So Wrong Fuel Rescue come along and save the day and charge you accordingly. The staff in the fuel station will help you push the car out of the way because it's best not to start it so the clients can continue to roll through. But as long as they know what's going on, they can work around you. That would be a good manners. As a young mechanic, I had to on a few occasions do this particular job, and it was, for the mechanic, it's awful. For the person who puts the fuel in, they just simply turn up and the car's done for them. But diesel's very, very slippery stuff, and it gets through everything.
It also creates in a fleet vehicle as well, like if someone makes that mistake, because obviously the fuel card is aligned to either a petrol or a diesel, so quite often for that employee, if it's a fleet, they won't be able to pay for it either. So there needs to be a mechanism in there as well, because they won't be able to use the fuel card for that vehicle.
Okay, I actually wasn't aware of that. So
I know through experience, I had a guy working for me who did that.
Right, common. So his fuel card determined
petrol only.
People.
So he put, I think it was petrol into a diesel, and then went in to pay, and that's when we discovered that he'd put the mistake in.
Bummer. That's it's funny when it happens to someone else, of course, but geez, they're frustrating. But cars will still run. You know, if you're in the middle of the desert and you had to, it'd still run. It wouldn't love you for it. But right. So all checkable fluids means that, and this is slowly going away. The fluids are going away that you can't check. You can do oil still on most cars. That's an obvious one to do. And then engine oil. That's clearly a petrol engine there. When you check a diesel engine, they tend to be quite darker. Brake fluid, simply check the side of it. Don't open the lid if you can avoid it. Transmission oil, that's almost impossible to check these days. Or they're almost all sealed units. In fact, I don't know of a modern transmission that you can check. Power steering fluid, annoyingly, you have to have your engine running 9 times out of 10 to check the power steering fluid, because it's a pump that's operating, and then you can take your little lid off and check the dipstick on the power steering. But a decent car these days would have gone electric already, and electric is a wonderful system. It's cheap, easy, and efficient, and it doesn't require servicing. Then water. This is again a very obvious one. Water levels must be checked. Now, that's not how you check it, by lifting that cap off, obviously. So that's a sealed unit that's under pressure. If you release that at the wrong time, if it joins our atmospheric pressure, it can instantly boil. So that's not what you do. But check it when it's cold. You look at the high and low levels on the side of the bottle, and you cool it, and you want a positive color of either pink or green. And you don't mix pink with green, by the way. It's either pink or it's green. And the battery, and again, there's so many different types of battery here. I'll be so bold as to say a good car, but a well-designed car will have the battery hidden under a back seat. And you think, my goodness, why would you put it in such an awkward place? A battery should last 3 to 5 years. Battery is a massive fire risk, and it needs to be protected. They hate heat, they hate the cold. They hate being near engines. So having them in an engine bay has simply been a matter of convenience. What we're now seeing is that they're going into the back seat, under the back seat of a car, which a mechanic is familiar with that and can very easily lift it and replace it. But checking a battery is getting harder and harder to do as well. But if you can, you may have an inspection port at the top of your battery. If it's green, it's good. But there's so many different types of batteries. It's, again, frustrating, but simply driving it every week means it keeps it charged, but you'd expect it 3 to 5 years. Windscreen washer fluid, this is my pet hate, but not having this done. The windscreen washer fluid, by the way, we put in a recognised detergent and a bit of a slosh of metho, and that breaks the surface tension and it cleans it and dries better. There's nothing that degrades. And obviously electrics, so operational and clean. On our older Hiluxes, we've got headlights that are starting to go a bit opaque from the sun. It's a bit poor. So we polish those up to make those nice and bright, and plus it looks better. Indicators, naturally. Head and tail lights, of course, you've got to check those. And again, if you're doing it on your own, back it up to the wall and have a look. Number plate light is one that often people forget about. Reversing is an interesting one. Try checking that when you're in the car on your own. That's probably the one you run into problems with. And obviously dashboard lights that do well there. Right, so, and obvious things like terminal corrosion. I'll actually go past that now because that's such a rare event these days, seeing corrosion on terminals, that white fluffy stuff. If you are seeing a lot of that, you have another problem, and it may be servicing. To see corrosion on battery terminals these days is an extremely rare event. And then second last letter is R for rubber. And we've already spoken a fair bit about this, other than to throw in some information on that we expect to get 50,000 out of our tyres. Our tyres go through a fair bit of grief, by the way. They do hills, highway, gravel, and four-wheel driving. They do a 250k round trip, and we expect to get 50,000 k's out of them. And they're good tyres. We also judge someone's driving based on their tyre wear. Pressures, we spoke about the pressures. Another rubber that people don't think about is wiper blades. On the entry into every winter and every summer, we change our blades over there and then. The problem with summer is that if it gets warm enough, the blades will actually weld a little bit onto the hot glass. And if you take them off the glass, it leaves little strips of rubber behind, and now the blade's no good. So new blades for summer, new blades for winter. And then finally, safety, being kept free of loose items. This is not a new thing, and if you're involved in the safety game, loose items pose a really significant problem. The car here has a safety barrier, that's what gets used, but I still can't believe what floats around in cabins. And seeing a laptop floating around on the passenger seat is got to be one of the biggest warning signs to someone's driving behaviour, because they're looking at it. Secure it all. Seat belts obviously haven't been faded from sun or cut somehow. And now I'm going to give you a run around on this brief video. I'll step away while this happens.
So with vehicle checks, we engage a acronym of POWERS. Now, POWERS stands for petrol, oil, water, electrics, rubber, and safety. I'll show you under the bonnet how that works directly. But obviously some cars don't have petrol, they have diesel, and we've got other cars now that are electric, so they don't have petrol or diesel. Part of the checks, though, are still similar. I'll also point out to you some of the corrections you can make under the bonnet. So from back here, you can actually have a look under the car and see that it's all clear, so there's no obstructions. This next part of the test means that I'll walk around the car and finish back at the driver's door again. So firstly, this front tyre and wheel. Tread's good. There's no marks. My tail lights are good. Again, there's no marks. Now I check these tyres. Their inflation is good as well. All four of them look the same and all tread is good. Indicators, headlights and driving light are all good as well. So now I can do a more comprehensive check if it's that time to do one. This is the dipstick. There's a high and low level point on the dipstick. When you pull it out, you'll see it down here on the bottom. It's best to wipe it first and then check it. Brake fluid, it's best not to take the cap off. This is the power steering fluid. Some cars don't have this, they're now gone to electric motors, but you just need to check your car anyway to see if it has the power steering fluid or not. The coolant bottle. You can see there's a high and low level mark on the side of the bottle. If it needs replacing or needs filling up, just fill it up with water before you take it to a mechanic. Occasionally a battery might have little white fluff around it, and this is corrosion. The best way to get rid of that is just get some warm water out of a kettle and just sprinkle it over the terminal. While you're under the bonnet, it's worthwhile having a bit of a check around to see that nothing's loose, like battery and radiators and things like that.
Cool.
So I would think the main thing to understand there is that you don't need to be a mechanic to do a basic check. You don't need to get carried away doing that check every day. That is absolutely overkill. But whether a car is being driven or if it's being parked up, it still needs that weekly health check. And earlier on, I said that like an aeroplane, it's happier in the air than it is on the ground. Planes deteriorate very, very quickly when they're left on the ground. And a car will do the same thing if it's not being used. And so that's really the message there. The other thing is, you may have noticed that that particular car, that car's actually done, it's new, but it's done an awful lot of kilometres. It also had a polycarbonate bar on the front of it. And one of the things that we check with that is obviously the lights work on that bar, but we also give that bar a bit of a shake to make sure that it's all still beautifully connected. We choose that over steel. So having an understanding now a little deeper of just those basic checks. Once it's parked, again, this is a very simple thing. One of the discussions that I really like getting into and talking about is challenging why people insist on reverse parking. And that's not to say I don't agree with it, but I like to challenge it because I think most people actually do it for the wrong reason. They can be motivated differently. But to be parked neatly and accurately and considering doors, this means that the slowest thing is done accurately. So there's an element of pride there. But opening doors onto other vehicles and sometimes even offsetting cars a bit can be handy, just if it's a busy car park so people can get in and out. In a shopping centre, I make a point of going to the end, parking in the last part, and I reverse park because I like to see what I'm going to hit when I'm driving out. And these, but it's a pride thing as well, very, very simple. Ideally, you park them under cover, at least off the street, and away from tree sap, bird droppings, hail damage. That's all the rage now in Queensland, isn't it? This week, actually. I think this week has got a high likelihood of hail. We've got our cars in Queensland, we've gone and hidden those. Windows closed, including the sunroof. Now, here in Adelaide, we are undercover here and we will leave our windows open by just a little bit, just to allow some airflow through. Remove the keys and lock the vehicle. Now, you might say, well, that's obvious. So it's not just obvious. You actually have an obligation not to leave the keys in the vehicle. It's actually an offence to leave the keys in the vehicle. I reckon you find insurance companies lobby to have that one. But if your keys are in a vehicle and you walk more than 3 paces away, that's an offence. And then keys are stored in a secure place and everyone knows where they are and so on. That's more to do with pull vehicles, obviously. So if I can wrap this up as we go, vehicle maintenance, why it's important. It maintains the integrity of the vehicle. It's been constantly checked. You know that the lights and brakes work and the value of it is sustained because it's being used. That very simple weekly safety check combined with topping up tanks and keeping it clean is something we would like to see done more regularly. And COVID-19, of course, has meant that a lot of these vehicles are being parked up requiring that different type of love as opposed to the ones that are being driven flat out, but similar insofar as you're checking them over and keeping them clean. If you have any sort of further questions there, we'd really like to field them. I think that the problem that we've found is organisations have got cars parked up and they're still paying out leasing bills and they're not using their vehicles, and that's been an element of frustration too. But leaving cars, let's say you've got 100 vehicles in your fleet and you've got them parked out on a hard stand area and they haven't been touched in 3 months, you're going to have to go through quite diligently and I'd prefer to have some dedicated people do those checks and say, check the car, take it for a drive, make sure the flat spots are gone from the tyres, get it clean, get it back into operation again. Because now, thankfully, for those of you who are spent the last, what must feel like 15 years stuck in your house in Victoria, you're now going to get back into life again, and you're going to have to, pretty much hit the ground running. And something like a car can very, very easily undo you. So make sure that they are checked over. It's a simple thing. Take them for a drive, get them cleaned, get them working again. Field all of your questions through Jerome, and he will gladly pass them on. So I'll thank you for your time, Jerome.
Thanks so much. Do we have any questions from everyone at all? Obviously, we would take them through, but I think one other one just would be, Cameron, when you were mentioning the security and safety of the vehicles, and I guess some of them have been parked up, have you heard rumblings whether there may have been a bit more of a target of break-ins or components like that, because all of a sudden people realise the vehicles are parked up and there's less security around them at all?
No, the organisations I'm aware of already had pretty good security, and they just parked them up and left them there. And it wasn't until we said, "Oh, you should really keep them moving." Like get one person in, and that poor bloke spends the whole week going through every vehicle, and there'll be 100 cars, let's say, parked in hard stand and open area. And no, I haven't heard anything about security. But in general, though, the crime rates have plummeted. There's only one crime rate that's gone up dramatically, which is appalling to even mention, but every other crime bar domestic violence has gone down.
That's
maybe it's
that's
low
great.
risk.
No, thank you very much, Cameron. Any questions from anyone else that they'd like to ask at all? Because I think it's been very informative. I've always, as I said, when we sat through the practice run, I learned a whole lot of new things as well. I reflect back to the days on the farm when we would park up different parts of our machinery, and I think one thing we never thought about was actually putting them up on blocks and just giving them those rests in between seasons. So,
yeah, well, that's I suppose that was an influence that we had of putting the vehicle or the header or harvester up on blocks and taking the weight off the bearings. That's going the next step. I just think what fleet managers need to look at is it clean? Are the levels fine? Has all the flat spotting been gone off the tyres and so forth? And is it back into operation? It's not a particularly exciting subject, I realise, but the fundamentals of getting back on top of it again and getting your fleet back up and running again is quite simple. Everyone really knows the powers thing, but take this away with you though. Have the car cleaned, tyre pressures checked, the levels checked, take it for a drive, make sure it's running well, air conditioning predominantly on fresh air, not on recirculate. And I can, if anyone wants to know more detail about that, I can go into detail.
We've got that in the COVID one as well, but Julie just asked a question on that anyway. If you can just draw on that a little bit and make that our final question. We're just going to go a little bit over because we started a little bit late, so we'll knock off in about 2 or 3 minutes. So Julie just wants to know, with COVID, what is the best air ventilation to use in the car?
Okay. So the back windows, have them down by between 2 and 5 centimetres and fresh air. Can I actually show you something really quickly? Oh. Excuse me, I have to drink this bottle to show it to you. Excuse me. Right, this was shown to me by a design and development engineer for a car company who was a bit hard on me actually, because I drove onto dirt and I put the air conditioning into recirculate, and he leant forward and flicked it to fresh air, and I leant forward, and because I'm from a farm, right, I know what I'm talking about, so I put it back to recirculate, and he leant forward and called me an idiot, and I had no idea what I was talking about, and showed me this. So we have a bottle, normal bottle that's empty. This is our dust particle, the rolled up bit of paper. I put that on the throat of the bottle there. Please don't make a fool of me. And I'm going to blow that bit of paper into the bottle. You see it fall out?
Oh.
I'll do it again. Can you see it falling out?
Yep.
So what's happening, I just dropped it in there. What's happening is that it's pressurizing the cabin and pushing the particle back out again. And that's the principle that air conditioning engineers use on cars. And it's why they have venting. It's why they've got the seals the way they are. And so you put it on fresh air, crank it up, pressurized cabin, no particles.
That's fantastic. I think that's a great way to close out, Cameron. Thank you so much for sharing that one.
Absolute pleasure, and I hope that was helpful for people.
If you can just go to the last slide, if that's all right, please. And one more, that'd be great. There's our contact details. Please, if you want to know more from Cameron, reach out to me, and I'm happy to link you guys up as well. Fantastic. Thank you to those who registered in today and took the time to join us. Thank you very much, Cameron. We have 2 webinars coming up next month, a bit of a theme on aggressive driving with Dr. Amanda Stevens. She's fantastic. She'll be talking on around some research we did with Budget Direct, and then we'll be talking around mindfulness and workplace road safety later on with some gurus from Smiling Mind researchers at Monash as well. So all evidence-based. Like we had 2 great webinars this month with Cameron. Thank you, everyone, and thank you again, Cameron.
My absolute pleasure, and everyone keep safe.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.